She was not meant to be breathing this air. Bryony pressed herself flat against the gallery rail, 3 floors above the great hall of Emberhold, and counted the minutes until she could disappear. Below her, 600 wolves in silver and deep blue turned through the slow figures of the opening dance, and every one of them had been summoned by name. She had not. She had come in a servant's grey wool, carrying her cousin's dancing slippers and bottles of scent, told to keep to the upper dark where no one looked. That had always been the rule. Do not be seen. Do not be caught on the air. Be nothing, and nothing can find you. At first light she had pressed hollow root oil into her wrists, and the hollow of her throat, the way she had every dawn she could remember. Now, long past the middle of the night, the bitterness had worn thin on her skin. She could feel it thinning. Keep counting, she told herself. The ball would end, Isora would be chosen, or she would not. And Bryony would ride home to Fenmark and go on being no one at all. Far below, on a low dais of black stone, sat the reason 600 wolves had crossed a kingdom. The Alpha King of Vaelrith did not dance. Emeric sat with one scarred hand loose on the arm of his seat and watched the floor the way a man watches weather he does not trust. He was younger than she had imagined. Highborn daughters were led past him one after another, each one lovely, each presented like a dish carried to a table, and he inclined his head to each, and his eyes stayed empty. He was searching for something he could not find, and he had begun to stop believing he ever would. She did not let herself look for long. Looking was its own kind of being seen. The heat was the danger. Too many bodies, too many candles, the great hall gone close and warm as a held breath. And warmth was the one enemy Hollowroot could not fight. She felt the first thread of it lift off her own skin, faint and strange, a scent she had never once been permitted to know as her own. Fear climbed the ladder of her spine. She turned for the servant's stair. And a draught, crossing the gallery, took that single thread of her down over the rail, down, through the bright warm air, into the hall below. The Alpha King went still, not the stillness of a bored man. The stillness of a wolf that has caught, on a cold, clear morning, the one track it has hunted its whole life and never found. His hand closed hard on the arm of the seat. Then he rose. He came to his feet in the middle of the kingdom's careful dance, and the music stumbled, and 600 faces turned toward him, and he looked at none of them. His head had tipped back. He was breathing the air beneath the high gallery as though it were the first clean air after a year buried underground. "Who is that?" he said. He did not say it loudly. He did not have to. "Where is she?" Bryony ran. She went down the servant's stair with the slippers clutched to her chest, and behind her she heard the great doors thrown wide, heard boots on stone, heard the low, urgent voice of a king telling his people to find the source of it, to bring her to him, to harm nothing. At the foot of the stair, a hand caught her arm, not to hold her, to steady her. Some guardsman she never saw clearly, drawing her clear of the crowd, and in the half-dark, his eyes passed over her grey wool and her plain, tired face, and let her go. A scentless nobody in servant's grey could not be the thing a king had risen from his throne to find. That was the only reason she reached the cold courtyard and the waiting cart. The single mercy in the whole long night. She did not know, pressed shaking beneath an oilcloth, as the cart rolled out through the gates of Emberhold, that she had just ruined the Alpha King of Vaelrith for every other living soul. She knew only the oldest rule, the one that had kept her alive for 21 years. Never let them catch your scent. For 30 days the Alpha King of Vaelrith hunted a ghost. Word of it reached even Fenmark, carried by traders on the Mire Road and by Isora's furious letters home. The king had dismissed every daughter presented at the ball. He had walked the empty gallery at dawn on his own 2 feet, breathing the cold stone where a scent had been. He had sent riders to every house that attended with a single question that made sense to no one. Which of your women wore no scent at all? and house after house had answered that none of theirs had. Because who would bring a scentless woman to a mating ball? And the king had thanked them, and sent them away, and taken no mate. A wolf king with no chosen mate was a crack running through the world, and his court felt the cold come through it. An alpha who would not bond was an alpha whose line ended with him. A line that ended was a throne. 100 hungry cousins began, very quietly, to measure for themselves. Bryony heard all of it from the scullery at Fenmark and said nothing, and pressed Holyrood into her wrists at every dawn, with hands that would not quite go steady. She had told no one what happened on the gallery. There was no one to tell. Her aunt was 3 years dead, and her uncle had never once looked at her as though she were a person he might listen to. Then, on a grey morning, near the turn of the season, the writ came from Emberhold, and everything her family had built their hope on began to fall. Her uncle read it twice at the head of the long table before he spoke. Lord Corliss was a lean, careful man, who had spent Bryony's whole childhood teaching her to be invisible, and she had always believed it was shame that made him do it. The scentless niece, the flaw in the house. She would learn, much later, that shame had been the smallest part of his reasons. The crown, he said at last, calls in the old blood debt. House Corliss owes the throne a life given in service. In this generation, the throne will take that life as a bride. One daughter of this house is to be sent to the king, to bind us to his peace, before the first snow. Wysara went white, then red. She had spent the season, being told the king would surely choose her once he came to his senses. Now she saw the truth of it. To be sent as a debt paid was not to be chosen. It was to be handed over. "Send her," she said, and her finger came up, and it was pointing down the table at Bryony. The room went quiet. "She is a daughter of this house," Isora said. Faster now, warming to it. "She has your name, father." "It does not say which, and the king, poor mad creature, has agreed to take whatever bride is sent to him. He is past caring. He will not even look at her, and what he cannot love, he cannot miss. Let the scentless one be of use for once." Bryony sat very still. She had learned long ago that stillness drew the least blood. She waited for her uncle to refuse. Not out of love. She had never once been shown that. But surely, she thought, even Corliss would not send the scentless thing he had hidden for 21 years to the one court in the world where every wolf alive could smell a lie. Corliss looked at her down the length of the table for a long moment. Something moved behind his careful eyes that she could not read, something that was almost fear, and it was not fear of the king. "Very well," he said. "The scentless one goes." He set the writ down. "At least the flaw in the house will finally pay for its keep." No one asked Bryony what she wanted. In 21 years no one ever had. They spent the rest of that dinner deciding the details of her life, across her bowed head, how she would travel, what poor goods she would be given, how the loss of her would be explained, and not one of them thought to wonder whether she wished to go to a stranger's bed in a strange cold mountain hall. She sat with her hands folded and let them talk, and under the table her heart was beating so hard she was sure the whole room must hear it. They were sending her to Emberhold, to Vielreth, to the black stone hall. She had fled in the dark with her cousin's slippers in her arms. They were giving her scent and skin and secret to the one wolf in all the world who must never ever learn what she was. The one who had left his throne to find her. And he was still looking. There was no ball for the second bride of the season. They married in the grey hour after dawn, in a side chapel of Emberhold, with a stone floor and 9 witnesses, and Bryony stood in a borrowed gown and thought that she had never in her life been so afraid, and so plainly coldly safe at the same time. Afraid, because the man beside her had upended a kingdom hunting the very thing she carried under her skin. Safe, because she had done the one thing that had ever protected her. She had arrived scentless. She had ridden 4 days to reach the mountain. Each of those dawns she had worked the hollow root oil into her wrists and throat and the soft places behind her ears until the world could not read her, and each night She had lain awake in a cold inn feeling it fade, feeling the faint forbidden thread of her own true scent try to rise. The oil held while the sun was up, it thinned as the sun went down. That was the shape of every day she had ever lived, masked by light, bare by dark. No one had ever told her what her true scent was, only what it meant. Her aunt had said it once, dying, gripping Bryony's hand too hard. "They will kill you for it if they ever catch it on the air," she had said. "Not because it is foul, child. Because of whose it is. Keep it buried. Be no one. That is how you stay alive." And then she had made Bryony swear the second half of it. The part that made no sense to a frightened girl, and less sense now. The oil hides you. If a man ever loves you for the scent, you are bound to it forever. But let a man love the nothing, the woman with all of it stripped away, and the binding breaks. That is the only key there is. Bryony had not understood. She had only sworn. Now, she stood in a chapel beside a king, and made her vows in a voice she kept flat and quiet, and waited for him to be cruel. He was not. The court had come to see the king's shame, the plain, scentless nobody sent to pay a debt, and they did not trouble to hide their faces. A woman near the front said loud enough that a scentless wife was no wife at all, only a thing to keep the treaty warm. Bryony kept her chin level and her eyes forward and had long practice at not flinching. Then Emeric turned his head and looked at the woman until she stopped. And the silence he made was worse for her than any shout. "My wife has ridden 4 days through the cold to keep a peace. Your comfort rests on," he said. "She will be spoken to with the respect owed the Queen of Vaelreth, or she will not be spoken to in my hearing at all." He did not raise his voice. He did not look at Bryony either, and she was grateful for it, because her eyes had gone hot, and she did not want him to see. No one had ever once stood in a room and set his weight between her and the world. She had not known she was starved for it until it happened. That evening, he came to the tower rooms they had given her, and her heart nearly stopped because the sun was going down and the oil was thinning, and if he came close in the dark, he might catch the first true thread of her. But he stopped inside the door and kept the width of the room between them. "You need not fear me," he said. "I will not come to your bed to claim a debt, whatever the court expects." He looked tired in the low light, tired in the bones. "When you wish to speak to me, you will find me easy to speak to. When you do not, I will leave you be. That is all I came to say." He turned to go. And because he was kind, and because she had never once been shown kindness, and did not know what to do with it, she said the wrong thing. She said, "Why did you take a bride? You never chose." Emeric stood a moment, with his hand on the door. "Because I already chose," he said quietly, "and I lost her the same night." He did not look back. At the last ball there was one breath on the air, one, from someone I never saw and cannot find. I have hunted it 30 days. I will hunt it the rest of my life. He gave a short tired laugh with no humor in it. "So you see, my lady, you are wed to a fool who is already lost to a ghost. It is a poor bargain, and I am sorry for it. Sleep well." The door closed. Bryony stood alone in the dark of the tower as the last of the hollow root burned away, and her own true scent, the forbidden thing, the thing men would kill for, rose freely and unseen into the empty room. She was the ghost. She was the breath he would spend his life chasing, and she had just walked, willingly, into his house. The court needed to see a marriage, so a marriage was what Bryony gave them. A king who would not be seen beside his queen had something to hide, and Vaelreth already whispered that its king hid things enough. So most days she was brought down among them, to sit at his right hand, at meals and stand at his shoulder when petitioners knelt, wrapped always against the cold, and she prayed against every nose in the hall. The being near was the hard part. A hall of wolves was a hall of noses, and every hour past noon the hollow root wore thinner on her skin. She learned to sit by the draughty doors, to plead a headache and slip away, to read the light on the stone when she had an hour left before she was no longer safe to be smelled. She did not learn how to stop wanting to stay. That was the trouble with him. He did not fill a silence to hear himself speak. He asked a question, and then, strangely, for a king waited for the answer, as though it might weigh something. She found the terrace on the fourth night. She had fled the hall, with the light going amber, and her skin prickling, meaning to reach her tower before the oil failed. She took the wrong stair, and it led her onto a long open walk on the north face of Emberhold, where the mountain wind came off the peaks in a cold, steady river and never stopped. It took every scent, every trace, and flung it over the black valley before it could carry an arm's length. She understood at once what she had found. The one place in the citadel where she was safe after dark. Here the oil did not matter. She was wined, scoured, and clean, and no living wolf could read a thing off her. She was not the only one who had learned it. Emmerich stood at the far end, his hands on the parapet, his face turned into the wind. He glanced back without surprise. "You found my one honest room," he said, the wind nearly taking the words off him. "I come here when the rest of it grows too loud." "It is the quietest place in the keep," she said. "Not loud with sound." He touched the side of his nose. "A hall of 300 wolves is 300 wants you never asked to hear. Fear, greed, who wishes you gone? A wolf reads it all, whether he will or no. Up here, the wind takes it, and a man can hear himself think." She came to the parapet and kept an arm's length between them out of habit and did not need it. After that, she went up every night. The wind blew, and most nights he was there. It became, without either of them naming it, theirs. All her life she had been schooled to give a person as little of herself as she could, nothing to catch. But the wind made a room where nothing could be caught in any case, and there she found she could say true things, and he did not use them against her. "You are not what they told me," he said one night, his eyes on the valley. Her chest tightened. "What did they tell you?" "That the scentless bride was simple, dull." He shook his head. "Whoever decided that never troubled to listen to you. You may be the only soul in this keep who has said a plain, true thing to me, and wanted nothing back for it. You cannot know how rare that is to a man who smells every hunger in a room." No one had ever named her the opposite of dull. She turned her face into the wind so he would not see what the words had done to it, and yet, riding back to her cold tower, she found the thorn inside the warmth. He trusted her, because he could read nothing off her. To his nose, she was a clean quiet in a screaming world, and the very nothing she had spent her life becoming was the thing he leaned on. He rested against her the way a tired man rests against a wall, and a wall did not get to want him back. Then, on a night near the close of that first month, the wind died. It went all at once, the way mountain wind will, a whole river of air ceasing between one breath and the next, and the terrace dropped into a ringing stillness. The sweat went cold on her. The oil was hours old. And into that stillness, off her own warm skin, the first faint thread of her true scent began to rise. Beside her, Emmerich went still. She knew that stillness. She had seen it once, from 3 floors up, in a hall full of dancers. His head turned, his nostrils flared. Something crossed his face that was not the tired king she knew, but the hunter, the man who had walked off a throne, an arm's length from her in the dark. "For a moment, I thought," he said softly, and did not finish it. Then the wind came back off the peaks in a cold rushing wall and tore the thread of her away, and the moment broke, and he shook himself like a man waking. But he was frowning, and he did not stop for the rest of the night. The court grew crueler as the season turned. At first it had only been the cold faces and the loud whispers meant to be overheard, the scentless queen, the debt paid in a plain girl. But as the weeks wore on, and no announcement came, no heir, no true mating scent rising off the royal wing, the whispers sharpened into something with a point on it. The king was bewitched, they said. Everyone knew the tale of the ball, the phantom breath, the throne left empty in front of 600 wolves. A king who abandoned his own hall to chase a scent that was not there was a king whose mind had slipped its mooring. And the scentless wife he kept, who gave him nothing, no heir and no bond and no reason, was the proof of the sickness. Or perhaps its cause. Set her aside, the whispers said. Let him take a true mate, while the line can still be saved. That threat had a name, though the court was too careful to speak it aloud. Bryony learned the name on the terrace, in the wind, from Emeric himself. His cousin Lucan stood next in line while no heir existed. He was well loved by the old families, easy and bright, where Emeric was quiet and scarred, and he had never forgiven the turn of fortune that had set a younger cousin on the throne after Emeric's brother died. The council leans toward him, Emeric said one night, his eyes on the Black Valley. It always has. I hold this seat by a thread, and the thread is a bloodline that ends with me, unless it does not. He rubbed at his eyes, tired to the bone. With every other soul in that hall, I know exactly where I stand, he said. I can smell a loyalty souring across a room before the man himself knows it has turned. With you, I am blind, and I have stopped minding. Strange, that the only rest I get should come from the one person I cannot read. Bryony carried it the way she carried everything, her face still, and her back straight, giving them no crack to work at, but it wore on her. And on the days it wore hardest, she wanted the one thing she had never once been given freely in her life: a kind voice, someone who was glad she had come into a room. She had found one such person, or believed she had. Undine had been kind from the first week, when kindness cost her something. She was a lady of the high court, quick and warm and lovely, and where the others turned their shoulders, she had turned toward Bryony and offered her arm and her conversation, and slowly, what felt like her friendship. She told Bryony which lords to fear and which to flatter. She laughed at Bryony's dry small jokes as though they were treasures. In a keep, full of turned backs, she was a lit window. So on the afternoon, the court had been at its worst. Bryony went looking for her. She had another reason. One she told no one. The hollow root was running low. She had brought only what would fit in a traveling case, and there was no more of it in these mountains, for the plant grew in the warm southern mires, and nowhere else. She had been rationing it, thinning each morning's measure, and every thinned morning left her a little more exposed by dusk. She had heard the keep kept a still room where the healers dried their herbs, and she meant to see, quietly, whether anything there might stretch her dwindling supply. The still room lay off a cold back passage, its door ajar, and she was reaching for it when she heard Undine's voice inside. Low and unlovely in a way. Bryony had never heard it. She gives him nothing, Undine was saying. Half a season wed and no bond. The council is nearly ours, a man answered, and Bryony knew the voice at once. Lucan, all charm and white teeth at the high table, and here, in the cold behind a still room door. She froze with her hand a hair from the wood. Nearly is not done, Lucan said. My uncle's council is a herd of old men who move only when they are frightened. We must frighten them. An unfit king is not enough. We need an unnatural one. He gave a soft laugh, and there is something unnatural in that girl, Undine. I have watched her. She flinches from every nose in the hall. She sits by open doors. She flees, at dusk, as though the dark bites her. No scent, no heat, nothing a wolf can read. That is not a defect. A defect you can smell. That is a thing hidden on purpose. And a thing hidden on purpose is a thing I can use. Bryony's blood went to water. Get close. You have her trust, such as it is, whatever she is hiding. When I set it before the council beside a bewitched king and a barren bed, they will beg me to take the throne to save us all from it. And Emeric, Undine said. A king who cannot hold his own hall, Lucan said lightly, does not hold it long. Bryony backed away from the door on legs that did not feel like hers. One silent step, and then another, until the passage bent, and she could turn and walk, and then, when she was far enough, run. Her one lit window had been a spy hole all along. The only warmth offered to her in this cold place had been a hand reaching for the very secret that would end her. And now a man who wanted the throne was hunting the thing under her skin, the same way the king hunted the breath she had loosed at the ball, both of them circling the same buried truth from opposite sides, neither knowing the other chased the same woman. She did not go up to the terrace that night. She could not have borne his kindness on top of it. But near midnight, there came a knock, and it was not Emmerich. It was a broad, quiet man she had seen always at the king's shoulder, Dane, his second, with a face like weathered stone and eyes that missed nothing. "Forgive the hour, Majesty," he said. "The king asks after you. You did not come up." He worries, though he would not use the word. Briony looked at this steady man and understood he was the one loyal thing in a nest of knives, and that she could tell him nothing, because to warn the King of Lucan, she would have to explain how she had come to be listening at a still room door and why a spy had been set to hunt her secret, and what that secret was. "Tell him I was tired," she said. Dane studied her a moment longer, then was comfortable, then he inclined his head. He said before he went that a wolf who sits always by the open door is a wolf who has been hunted once and never stopped expecting it. He did not say it unkindly. He said it as a man lays a fact on a table. Then he left her with it. Bryony shut the door and leaned her back against it in the dark, and alone at last she let herself shake. Two hunters now, one who would love her if he caught her, and one who would kill her. And between them, growing thinner every single dawn, the last of the only thing that kept them both off the scent. For a while, in spite of everything, they were happy on the terrace. Bryony told herself she should not be. She knew what Ondine was now, knew what Lucan wanted, knew the hollow root in her case had thinned to a finger's depth of oil. And yet the hours in the wind with Emmerich were the only hours of her life she had ever spent being wholly herself with another living soul. And she could not make herself give them up. He made her laugh. That was the thing she had not expected from a scarred king who carried a kingdom on his back. One night she described the poem a hopeful young lord had sent her, a work of 19 verses, comparing the queen's grey eyes to various admirable stones, and Emmerich laughed so hard and so quietly that he had to grip the parapet and asked which stone had won, and she said gravel, and he lost himself entirely. She had never made anyone laugh before. She had spent her whole life trying not to be noticed. To sit in the dark and watch this grave man come apart over gravel was a joy so sharp it frightened her. She was in love with him. She could no longer pretend otherwise. The world beyond the wind would not wait for them, though it was Dane who brought the word. Plainly, the way he brought everything. The council had met. They had set a reckoning at the next full moon, a formal judging of the king's fitness to hold his seat, and the charge laid against him was written in the cold, flat language of law: a king, bound to no mate, siring no heir. His mind given over to a scent no other wolf could find. If Emmerich could not stand before them at the full moon and show a true mating bond, a queen who was queen, in fact, the council would be within its right to set him down and name another. Everyone in the keep knew whose name waited. "He will not ask you for this," Dane said, his weathered face giving away nothing. "It is not in him to ask a woman to save him. I tell you only because you once asked me for the truth of things, and this is the truth. There are 3 weeks until the moon." Then he bowed and left her with it, as he always did. And love, she began to think, might be the very thing that saved them both. For she remembered her aunt's dying words, the part that had made no sense to a frightened child. "The oil hides you. If a man loves you for the scent, you are bound forever. But let a man love the nothing, the woman with all of it stripped away, and the binding breaks." She had never understood what a broken binding might give her. But she understood now that Emmerich was coming to want her, the plain, scentless nothing of her, the woman, and not the ghost. If she could only reach that fully, If he could love the blank, quiet thing she was to his nose, then perhaps whatever her aunt had bound into her skin would loosen, and she would be free and safe and his. There was the throne to think of too. A true mating would silence the council. It would strip the weapon from Lucan's hand. An heir would end the whispers of a barren bed and a bewitched king. Every road she walked in her mind led to the same place. She had to become his wife in truth. So she gathered the whole of her courage, which took some days, and she went to him. She chose the daytime, when the hollow root was strong and there was no danger on the air. She came to his study in the pale morning light and shut the door behind her. And Emeric looked up from his papers with the open, unguarded face he only ever showed her, and it nearly undid her resolve before she began. "I have been thinking," she said, "of the council, and of you." He set down his pen. "They want a true marriage," she said, "a bond, an heir, and I want—" She stopped. She made herself go on, because she had promised herself she would not run this time. "I want to give them one. I want to be your wife in every way there is, not for the throne alone, for myself." She lifted her chin, the way she always did before a blow for you. The silence that came then was the longest of her life. She watched his face and waited for it to open, for the warmth she had seen 100 times in the wind to rise and answer her. She waited for him to cross the room. She had let herself imagine it on the long walk here, his hands, the way his careful stillness might break, but his face did not open, it closed. She watched a shudder come down behind his eyes, and he stood, and he moved, not toward her, but to the window, and put his back to her, and that was answer enough before he said a word. "Bryony," he said. His voice was rough. The cold started in her hands and climbed. "You honor me more than I deserve," he said to the glass, "but I will not take you to secure a throne, or to spite my cousin, or to quiet a room full of old men, and I will not take you while I am." He stopped. His hand had closed on the sill. "While I am what I am." She understood him to mean while he was lost, while the ghost still had him. She had asked a haunted man to love a living woman, and he had refused her, gently, the way he did everything, and it did not feel gentle at all. It felt like being handed back. "Of course," she said. Her voice came out steady, which was its own small miracle. "Forgive me, I misjudged." "I thought you judged nothing wrong," he said, turning, and there was something terrible in his face, some grief she could not place. "It is not you. I swear to you on my life, it is not you." "If you knew," he began, and then shook his head hard, as though shaking off a hand. "You would not thank me for it," he said. "Only believe that I refuse you, because I think too well of you, not too little." She could not hear it. All she could hear was no. She curtsied because a queen could always retreat behind a curtsy, and she left his study with her spine straight and her chin high, and she did not let herself weep until her own door was shut and locked behind her. She had offered him everything she had, and he had wanted the ghost instead. She never once let herself think the thought that would have saved her weeks of grief, because it was too large and too cruel to hold. That the ghost he could not stop loving, the one breath he would refuse a living wife to stay faithful to, had been standing in his study in the morning light, asking to be let in. He had turned her away for her own sake, and turned her away for the ghost's sake, and both of them were the same woman, and neither of them knew it. She was not left alone with it for long. Within the hour a soft knock came, and Ondine's voice, warm as it had ever been, asking to be let in. Bryony dried her face and opened the door. Because a locked door was a question and she could afford no questions now. "You poor creature," Ondine said, taking both her hands. "The whole keep is speaking of the reckoning. You must be so frightened." She drew Bryony down to sit, all tenderness, and her lovely eyes moved over Bryony's face, the way a hand moves over a coin, feeling for the true weight of it. "Is it true he still will not come to you?" she murmured. "Even now, with the throne itself hanging on it, It is almost as though something holds him back, or as though something holds you. She let that rest there, light as a feather laid on a wound. If ever you carried a thing too heavy to carry alone, she said, you know you might set it down with me. Bryony looked into the one warm face that had ever been turned toward her in this place, and understood at last what it truly was. A net sewn in the shape of a friend, cast again and again for the single thing that would hang her. Nothing holds me, she said. I am only tired. And she smiled, and lied, and watched the spy smile back and take her leave well pleased. And she understood that the thinning oil in her traveling case was no longer the only clock in the world counting down against her. The silver came for her 3 nights before the reckoning. The court had gathered in the great hall for the last feast before the moon, and Emmerich had brought Bryony down on his arm, because a king who meant to stand before his council as a true mated man could not hide his queen away until the eve of judgment. She had worked the oil into her skin twice that day. Against the crush of so many noses she sat at his side and ate nothing, and counted the hours until she could climb to the wind. She never saw the man come. Later, she would learn he had been a groom from Lucan's own stables, paid in coin and promises, pushed forward through the press of bodies with a thin blade held low along his wrist. She knew only that between one breath and the next, Emmerich moved. He had gone still a heartbeat before, the way he did when something reached him that no one else had caught, and she understood too late what it had been, not the man. The blade. The cold, flat reek of worked silver in a hall of wolves, coming fast and low and straight at his wife. He turned and put himself in front of her. The knife meant for Bryony's heart struck Emmerich's side instead, up beneath the ribs, and she felt it more than saw it, a hard jolt through him and a grunt torn from his chest. Then the man was dragging the blade back to strike again, and Dane hit him from the left like a falling wall. The hall came apart into screaming. Emmerich stood a moment longer with one hand pressed to his side. Bryony saw his hand clamp hard to his side, saw the strange gray sheen spreading at the edge of the hurt that had no business being there, and she knew. Silver did not let a wolf heal. Silver stayed, silver spread. Then his knees folded, and she caught what she could of him, and went down under his weight, both of them to the cold stone, her hands already pressed hard to his side. Emmerich, she said, his name and nothing else. His eyes found her face. Even then, even with the silver working into him, the first thing he did was try to look past her, around the hall, counting the dark for more knives. Are you hurt? He said. His voice had gone thin and wrong. Bryony. Are you hurt? I am not, she said. I am not. You fool. You stupid man. You. Good, he breathed, as though that settled the whole matter, as though his own torn body weighed nothing beside it. Good. Then his eyes rolled white, and his weight went slack against her, and all around them the hall was shrieking for healers, and for guards and for the name of the man who had done it, and Bryony knelt over her fallen husband in front of the whole cruel court, and did not spare one of them a glance. He had known the blade was coming, he had smelled the death folded into it, and with a lifetime of a king's reasons to save his own skin, he had turned and spent his body to keep hers whole. No one had ever once stepped between Bryony and the world, and meant it with their flesh. Her family had hidden her to save themselves. This man who owed her nothing, who had refused her in his own study not a week past, who believed her a scentless nobody, sent north to settle a debt, had taken silver into his ribs sooner than let it reach her. She pressed harder on the wound and felt his heart stumble under her hands. Do not, she told him, low and fierce for him alone. Do not you dare. I did not come all this way to watch you die in my place. You will stay. You do not have my leave to go. But the gray was already creeping up the veins around the hurt, and his skin was cooling far too fast, and when the healers reached her, they took one look at that silver sheen and went quiet, in the way people go quiet when they no longer see the use in hurrying. They carried him to the royal chambers, and Bryony went with him and did not leave. The healers worked through the first night to draw the silver out, and could not draw all of it. What the blade had left behind had gone too deep and too fine, threaded into him like frost into cracked stone, and a wolf's body that would have thrown off any ordinary poison turned on the silver and could not win. His fever climbed. The wound would not close. By the grey of the second morning, the head healer told Bryony plainly that the next days would decide it, and that she should prepare herself. And Bryony thanked her and did not prepare herself in the least. She sent the maids away. She told the healers to leave their draughts and their poultices outside the door, and to knock and go, and she would tend him herself. They took it for a wife's devotion, and it was. But it was also the only way, because the sun still set each evening over the Black Valley, and the oil on her skin still thinned to nothing by dark, and she could not have a single soul in the room when it did. So she nursed a dying man by day and guarded her own secret by night, alone in a locked room, and burned through what little hollow root she had left doing it. She learned his fever like a country. She learned when to lay the cool cloths and when to pile the furs, when the shivering would come and when the burning. She spoke to him through all of it, because the healer had said a familiar voice might hold him, and because the silence frightened her more than her own words did. She told him about the ridiculous poem and the winning stone. She told him things she had never told anyone. She was not sure he heard a word. On the third night he began to speak back. It was past dark and the oil was long gone from her skin, and Bryony sat close by the bed with his hand in both of hers, because his hand had begun to grip at nothing and holding it seemed to ease him. He was deep in the fever, his eyes moving fast beneath their lids, and the words came out of him, broken and low. "The Queen," he said. "Where is the Queen? Get her out." He tried to rise and could not. "They will come for her again. Dane. Where is she? Is she safe?" "I am here," she said. "I am safe. She is safe. You saved her. Lie still." The room had gone fully dark, and with the last of the oil worn from her skin hours since, the thing she kept buried had risen free into the closed air, filling the sealed room the way it never dared anywhere else. She had stopped noticing it. He had not. Deep in the fever, Emeric turned his face toward her. His breathing changed. The grinding of the pain eased by a fraction, and then by more, as though something in the dark had reached in and laid a cool hand on the worst of it. His head tipped, seeking. "There," he breathed, and the word was not fear now, but something wretchedly like peace. "There you are. I knew you were." Bryony went rigid, her heart stopping in her chest. Even ruined, even burning, some deep animal part of him had caught the one scent in all the world he had emptied a throne to find, and was following it down into the dark. For one endless moment, she was certain he would surface and know. But the fever had him too fully, and the knowing slid out of his grip as fast as it had come, and he sank again, quieter than he had been in 3 days, soothed by the very thing that could hang her. But he did not hear that it was her. In the fever, she was only a voice, and the woman he was frantic for was somewhere else, somewhere in danger, somewhere the knives could reach. "Not me," he said, gripping her hand hard enough to hurt. "Do not spend the guard on me, on her. All of it on her." He sank back, spent. "Promise me, she lives." Bryony sat with his words going through her like the silver went through him. She had knelt in his study a week ago and heard him refuse her and told herself he did not want her. And here he was with death, working through him, and the only thing left in the whole burning wreck of him was her name and her safety. He had not refused her because he wanted nothing. He had refused her for some reason she still could not see, and it had never once been that. She lifted his hand and pressed her mouth to his knuckles, and that was when it happened. It came through the place where their skin met, sudden and complete, a thing that was not hers, fear, first, vast and cold, but not fear for himself, fear shaped exactly like her name, then pain, the deep grinding wrongness of the silver. And under both, running beneath them, the way a river runs under ice, something so large and so quiet, she had no word for it, only the feeling of being, for the first time in a life spent hiding, wholly and helplessly wanted. It lasted a breath. Then his hand loosened toward sleep, and it was gone, snapped shut like a door in the wind, and Bryony was left staring at their joined hands with her heart slamming. She had felt him. She, who had never once in her life caught a scent, or a mood, or a want off another soul, who moved through a world of wolves, stone deaf to the thing they all could read, had just felt what he felt as clearly as her own skin. Only from him. Only through touch. She did not understand it. She was almost afraid of it. She did not let go of his hand. At the first gray of dawn, she worked a thin measure of the little oil she had left into her skin with shaking fingers, and by the time it was done, the fever finally broke. It went the way a storm goes, all at once the burning giving way to a cool, clean sweat, and his breathing came easier, and Bryony understood with a rush that left her dizzy that he would live. She was weeping without any dignity at all when his eyes opened, clearer than they had been in days, and found her. For a moment, he only looked at her. Then his nostrils moved, the smallest reflex, a wolf, reaching for the scent of the one at his bedside. And finding, as he always found with her, nothing there, a faint confusion crossed his face, some thread he could not follow. "You," he murmured, too weak and too worn to shape whatever it was. Then his hand turned in hers, and held it, and he slept, truly slept, and did not let go. Bryony sat in the dawn light holding the hand of a man who had nearly died to keep her safe, and did not know whether the thing thundering in her chest was terror or joy, and could no longer tell the two apart. The fever spared his life, and took something else instead. When Emmerich was strong enough to understand it, the head healer told him the truth without soft words, because he had ordered her to. The silver had gone too deep to fully draw. It had not killed him, but it had settled in the place where a wolf keeps his other self, and it had put that self to sleep. He could not shift. When he reached for his wolf, the healer said, there would be silence where all his life there had been a second heartbeat. Whether it would ever wake again, no one living could say. Bryony watched him receive it. He did not rage. He thanked the healer in a level voice and asked to be left. And only when the door had shut did she see what it cost him, the way his hand closed white on the edge of the bed, the way he would not look toward the window where the moon was rising over mountains. He could no longer run. For a wolf, it was a kind of blinding. For an alpha king, it was worse. A king held his pack through his wolf, through the strength every other wolf could feel and fear. A king who could not shift was a king in name only, and every soul at court would know it within the week. The reckoning came and went while he could barely stand, and there was no true bond to show the council, and no wolf left in him to show either, and it was Dane, grim and immovable, who bought them their reprieve. He stood before the old men, and argued that a king wounded, taking a blade meant for his queen, was a king who had proven his worth in blood, and that no honorable pack set down a wounded lord before he had healed. It held barely. The judgment was not dismissed. It was only delayed. They were given until the turn of spring, and they were counseled, for the king's recovery and the queen's safety both, to withdraw from court. So they went up into the mountains, to a high stone lodge at the head of a valley where the crown had once kept its hunting, and it was there, without either of them planning it, that Bryony was happier than she had ever been in her life. The lodge sat in wind, not the fitful wind of the lowlands, but a steady river of it, off the snowfields above, pouring down the valley, day and night without pause, scouring everything clean. From the first hour Bryony understood what it meant. Here, she did not have to oil her skin at dawn. Here, she did not have to flee the dusk or read the light on the wall or sit by open doors. Here the wind took her, all day and all night, and for the first time since she was a small child, she could stand beside another person from morning to morning and never once be afraid of her own body. She had almost no hollow root left in any case. In the wind, she did not need it. She stopped counting the hours. She had never in her life not counted the hours. Emmerich mended slowly and badly at first, and hated it. The strong man who had carried a kingdom now needed an arm to cross a room, and the loss of his wolf had left him worse than weak. It had left him deaf and blind in the way that mattered most to his kind. He could no longer read a room by scent. He could no longer feel a lie coming or a mood turning or a friend approaching in the dark. He sat by the fire those first days like a man in a fog, flinching at footsteps he had not smelled coming, and Bryony watched him drown in a silence she had lived in every day of her life, and so she taught him. "Watch their hands," she told him one evening when he had snapped at a servant who startled him. "You cannot smell them coming. Neither can I. I never could. So watch the hands, watch the eyes, watch the door." A man about to lie touches his own face. A man who means you harm goes still in the shoulders first. She had learned all of it in a childhood spent reading a world she could not smell, and she laid it out for him piece by piece, like a woman teaching a language she had spoken alone her whole life. He stared at her. "All this time," he said slowly, "you have lived like this. Every day. In a hall full of wolves. Every day," she said. "It is not so terrible, once you stop grieving the nose you have not got." She almost smiled. You learn a great deal about a person when you cannot simply breathe them in and be told. Something changed in him after that. He stopped treating his loss as the end of himself, and began treating it as a thing that could be learned around, because the woman across the fire had been living proof of it since before he met her. The scentless queen the whole court had pitied turned out to be the one person alive who knew exactly how to be what he had become. And slowly, watching her, he came back to himself. The days that followed were the best Bryony had known. They walked the wind cliffs each morning, slowly, her arm through his, until he no longer needed it. She showed him how she read the weather, off the light, and the birds, instead of the air. He told her about his brother, the true heir, dead at 20 and the crown falling sideways onto a second son who had never wanted it. She told him a little, at last, of her own life. Not all of it, but a little. "I was not born without a scent," she said one gray afternoon, watching the snowfields. "It was done to me, when I was a child, to hide me." She kept her eyes on the white distance. "There are people who would kill me if they knew what I truly am. I do not fully know it myself. I know only that I was made into no one so that I might live. And I have been no one so long, I hardly remember there was ever anything else." She waited for him to press. Everyone pressed. And Merrick only walked beside her a while. And then he said, "Then whoever made you no one did a poor job of it, because you are the most someone I have ever known." And he let it rest there, and asked her nothing more, and Bryony felt something in her chest come loose that had been clenched tight for 21 years. That was when the other thing began to happen more often. The feeling through the skin. When he steadied her on the cliffs, when their hands met over a book, she would catch it, that thread of him that was not hers, warmth and wanting, and always now, threaded beneath it, a low dark note of guilt she did not understand. It came and went too fast to hold. She told herself she imagined it. She knew she did not. They were on the terrace of the lodge at dusk, the wind loud around them, when it nearly happened. She had turned to say something and found him already looking at her, and the words went out of her. He lifted his hand and touched her face, the first time he had ever touched her by choice and not by need. And through that touch, the feeling came flooding, stronger than it had ever come. His whole heart poured through one point of contact. She felt him wanting her so plainly it stole her breath, and she felt right beneath it that dark thread of guilt swell up huge and sick and certain, as though the wanting and the guilt were the same thing wearing two faces. He was a breath from kissing her. Then his hand fell. He stepped back as though she had burned him, and the guilt she had felt through his skin was there plain on his face now, and he said, low and rough, I cannot, not you. And he turned and left her in the wind, and Bryony stood with her heart pounding and her face still warm from his hand, and understood two things at once: that he loved her, and that he was hiding something that was eating him alive. That night a rider came up the valley in the dark with the crown seal on his coat, and the peace of the mountains ended because the turn of spring was near, and the council had summoned the king down to be judged. They came down out of the wind, and everything grew dangerous again. The lodge had been a country of two people. The road back to Emberhold was a country of noses, and Bryony had perhaps 3 days of oil left in the bottom of the vial if she was careful, and she was not careful enough, because grief and fear burned through a mask faster than heat ever could. She rationed it to a smear at the wrists each dawn, and spent every hour afterward measuring the light. There was one mercy in the whole cold business, and it was a cruel one. Emmerich could no longer smell her at all. The silver had taken that from him too. The very sense that had emptied a throne for the want of her was gone silent in him now, and so the closer they came to court, the safer she was from the one wolf who had ever nearly caught her. She hated that it comforted her. It comforted her all the same. Dane met them on the road with his face like a shut door, and drew Emmerich aside, and Bryony, who had learned to read a conversation she could not hear, watched the king go very still. Later he told her, because he had stopped keeping things from her all but the one thing. Dane had found the thread and followed it home. The groom with the silver blade had been Lucan's man. The coin that paid him had come through Lucan's steward, and Ondine, sweet Ondine, had carried word for months of every private hour the king spent, or did not spend, in his wife's rooms. It was all of a piece. Lucan had meant for the queen to die at that feast, and a grieving broken king to fall at the reckoning, and the throne to drop into a waiting hand. We have proof enough to bring before the council, Dane said. But not proof enough to be believed over a man they already love, unless the king stands before them whole. He looked at Emmerich's hand, which still could not quite make a fist, and you are not whole. That night, Bryony understood at last what Emmerich had been hiding, and she came to understand it the way she understood everything about him now, through the skin. He had come to her rooms to speak of the reckoning, and she had reached out to take his hand, and he had let her, and the flood came. She had grown better at holding it. She held it now. And in it she read the whole shape of the thing that had been eating him since the mountains. It was not that he did not want her. He wanted her past all sense. It was that he had decided, somewhere in the long nights of his recovery, that wanting her was a thing he had no right to do. He was a king who could not shift. A king the council would set down within the season. A king with a cousin who had already tried once to have his wife killed and would try again and again and would not stop while there was a throne to win and a queen in the way of it. And Emmerich had looked at all of that and concluded, with the terrible steady logic of a man who thinks too little of himself, that the kindest thing he could do for the woman he loved was to stop being married to her. And beneath that logic, in the place he believed no one could reach, she felt the rotten root of it. He thought himself worth less now than the day she had met him, a wolf with no wolf, a king with no crown coming. He had decided he was a broken thing, and that a broken thing did not get to keep what it loved, and that giving her away was not surrender, but the last decent act left to him. You are not less than you were, she said quietly. His head came up. I said nothing. You did not have to, she said. I have felt you since the night you nearly died. When we touch, I feel what you feel, as plain as my own skin. I do not know how it can be. She held his gaze. so do not sit there and build me reasons out of careful words. I can feel the truth of you underneath them, and the truth is that you are running from your own worth and calling it my safety." He stared at her, shaken to stillness. A man who had spent his whole life reading others, laid suddenly open himself. For a moment she thought he might name the thing. Neither of them understood. He did not. Whatever it was, it frightened him, as deeply as it frightened her. "Then, say the rest of it aloud," she told him, keeping his hand so he could not hide. "All of it. To my face." He did. He had arranged it already. He confessed. He meant to go before the council and set her aside, cleanly, an annulment, the debt, marriage dissolved. He would send her far south under Dane's protection, out of Lucan's reach, out of the reach of whatever hunted her blood. Free of a doomed king and a poisoned court, she would be safe. She would be no one again, which was the only thing that had ever kept her alive. He had thought it all through. He had thought it through the way a man arranges his own funeral. "It is the one gift I have left to give you," he said. "Your life. Take it." "No," Bryony said. He looked at her as though he had not understood the word. "No," she said again. "I have been given my life that way once already. My family gave it to me by making me no one and shutting me in the dark. And they called it protection, and it was the loneliest thing that has ever been done to a person. I will not take the same gift from you and call it love." She was shaking. "I did not survive 1 in 20 years of being no one, to be sent away and made no one again by the only man who ever saw someone in me." "Bryony," he said, and his voice broke on it. "If you stay, you will die. Lucan will not stop. I cannot protect you. I cannot even shift. Then we will die having chosen it," she said, "which is more than I have ever been allowed to do." For a moment she thought it had reached him. She felt it surge through their joined hands, the wild want in him to simply give in, to keep her, to be selfish for once in his ruined life. She was a breath from him. The candle guttered. And then, deep in the keep below, a bell began to toll, slow and iron, calling the court to gather, calling the king down to be judged, and the moment shattered in her hands. He drew back, his face closed over. It is done at dawn, and he left her to arrange his own undoing. Bryony stood alone in her rooms as the bell tolled on, and took out the vial, and turned it in the candlelight, a smear of oil in the bottom. 1 dawn's worth, perhaps. The last of the only thing that had ever hidden her. She thought about the reckoning. She thought about Emmerich standing before the council to give her away for her own good, and Lucan, waiting in the wings, with a dead man's patience, and the whole cruel court ready to be rid of the scentless queen at last. And she thought about the things she had never once let herself think. He had left his throne, that first night, for one breath of her, not the nothing, the everything. The true scent buried under 1 in 20 years of oil, the thing her aunt had sworn would doom her if a man ever loved it. If she let him catch it now, if she stopped hiding after a lifetime of it, and let him breathe what she truly was, the binding might lock around her forever. She might never be free. But he might stay. He might fight. He might stand before that council, not as a broken king giving his wife away, but as a wolf who had found the one thing his kind spends a life hunting, and dares the world to take her. She looked at the smear of oil that was her safety and her freedom, and 1 in 20 years of staying alive. And near dawn, with the bells still tolling in the dark, she did not put it on. The great hall of Emberhold was full again, as full as it had been the night she first ruined him, and once more Bryony stood at the edge of it with a secret under her skin. Everything else had changed. The council sat in a grave row beneath the black dais. The court packed the floor where dancers had turned half a year before. Lucan stood near the front in pale gray, calm as a man who has already counted his winnings, and beside him, Ondine, lovely and composed, her eyes moving over the room. And at the center of it all, on his feet, by will alone, stood Emmerich, come down to give his wife away and to call it mercy. He had not seen Bryony yet. She had come in late and to the side, and she stood now in a plain dark gown, with her hands empty, and her wrists bare, and no oil on her skin at all, as there had not been in 21 years. She had not slept. She had knelt over the vial until the bell stopped tolling and the sky went gray, and she had not put it on, and now she could feel the thing she had hidden, her whole life rising off her freely into the crowded warmth of the hall, unmasked, spreading. She was doing the one thing that had always meant death. She was letting them catch her scent. The king began to speak. He stood before his council, and he did not spare himself. He told them the marriage had been a debt paid, not a true bond, that there was no heir and might never be that. He could no longer shift. He told them, in a level voice that cost him more than the silver had, that a pack deserved a whole alpha, and that he would not cling to a seat he could not fill, nor to a wife he had brought only danger. He asked the council to dissolve the marriage, and let the queen go south, free and unharmed, and to grant him until midsummer to set his own affairs in order. It was the noblest speech Bryony had ever heard, and every word of it was a knife, and he was driving each one into himself with a steady hand and calling it a gift to her. Lucan was smiling. Then the first wolf near the doors froze. Bryony felt the change move through the hall, the way wind moves through a field, head after head coming up, nostrils flaring, a murmur spreading. Her scent had reached them. She watched it travel, watched the confusion, then the shock, then something on the older faces like awe and fear, worn together. A woman of the council came half out of her seat, an old lord went white. The murmur climbed toward a roar. Because it was not the scent of a scentless girl. Whatever her aunt had buried in her all those years ago, whatever her blood truly was, it filled that hall now like a bell struck in a silent room. And every wolf in it knew, the way wolves know the oldest things, that they were breathing something they had been taught was gone from the world. Only one man in the hall did not turn, only one did not catch it. Emmerich stood at the center of the rising storm, his ruined nose silent, watching his court reel at something he could not smell, and on his face was pure bewilderment. He found no cause for any of it, and then at last he looked toward the side of the hall to see what they were all turning to see, and he saw her. Bryony walked out into the open floor. The crowd fell back from her on every side, wolves pressing away from a scent too great to stand near, so that she crossed the hall alone in a widening circle of empty stone, straight to the one man on the dais, who could not smell her at all. "Bryony," he said. His voice was hoarse. "What are you doing?" "Choosing," she said. She climbed the 2 steps to him and took his hand, and the moment her skin met his, the flood came, but it did not stop at a flicker this time, and it did not snap shut. It opened all the way, and stayed open, and she felt him whole, his shock, his fear, for her, in this room full of knives, his bone-deep certainty that he was watching her destroy herself, and beneath all of it the vast quiet wanting that had never once wavered. "Listen to me," she said low, for him alone, while the hall roared around them. "That night, the ball, the breath that took you off your throne, the one you have hunted since, the one you swore to me you would chase to the end of your life." She tightened her grip on his hand. "It was me. It was always me. I stood in the gallery in a servant's grey. I ran from you down the back stairs. I have been running from you ever since, and I am done with running." She watched him fail to understand, and then begin to, and then go utterly still. "You cannot smell me," she said, and her eyes were streaming now, and she did not care. "You have loved a scentless nothing on a cold terrace for half a year, a blank quiet with nothing at all on the air, and you loved her anyway for herself when she had nothing to give you." She pressed his hand flat to her heart. "Do you not see it? That is the only thing in the world that could ever have set me free." Somewhere far off inside her, in a room that had been locked since she was a small child, something turned over and woke. It did not hurt. She had always imagined it would hurt. Instead, It was warmth returning to a limb she had forgotten was cold, spreading out from her chest to her hands and her throat, and behind her eyes, and with it came the whole silenced world at once. 300 wolves worth of scent and mood and fear pouring into senses she had never once been allowed to use. She swayed with it. Emmerich caught her weak as he was, his arm going around her out of pure instinct, and as he pulled her in against him, the binding her aunt had wrapped around her 21 years ago simply let go. And her wolf, who had slept since before she could remember, opened her eyes. Bryony felt the answer begin in him a heartbeat later. Through the open bond, through the arm crushed around her, she felt the cold silver quiet at the center of Emmerich, where his own wolf had lain sleeping, and she felt her own newly waking self lean toward it without her willing it. The way one flame leans toward another. She felt him gasp. She felt, deep in him, something stir that had not stirred since a blade went into his ribs. A second heartbeat shudder and catch and begin, faintly, raggedly to beat. His wolf was answering hers. He drew back just far enough to look at her, and his eyes were wet, and they had gone gold at the rims in a way they had not managed since the feast. "You," he said, the same word he had breathed in the fever, but whole now and knowing. "It was you, all this time, it was you, in my own house, at my own table, and I gave you away with my own mouth not an hour past." "You did," she said, and half laughed, and half wept. "You are a very great fool." "I am," he agreed, and pulled her back in. Around them the hall had gone from roar to a strange charged hush, because a court of wolves could feel what was moving between the two figures on the dais, even if none could have named it. An alpha king thought broken and a queen thought nothing, binding to one another in front of them so fiercely that the very air seemed to bend toward it. It was Dane who turned the wonder into a reckoning. He stepped out before the council with a leather folio in his fist, and his voice like a dropped stone, and he laid it all bare. The groom and the silver blade, Lucan's coin, passed through Lucan's steward, the months of a spy, carrying word out of the queen's own rooms. And now the whole hall could read the truth of their queen with their own senses. The ancient blood in her that no schemer had counted on, mated true to a king, whose wolf was waking before their eyes. Frightened old men move quickly, once the fear points a new way. Guards took Lucan where he stood, the easy smile gone from him at last, and Ondine reaching for a door that loyal hands had already barred. Later, Bryony would learn what she was, or what was left to be known of it. That her blood was the old royal line, the true queen's, whose scent had called to alpha kings before Emmerich's grandfather's grandfather was born, hunted to nothing generations past by men who wanted the crown to run through blood they could rule. That a single child had been carried out of that slaughter and hidden with a distant frightened branch of the family. Her scent bound away, her wolf stilled, raised to be no one, because no one was the one thing they could not kill. That Lord Corliss had not hidden her out of shame at all. He had hidden her from the same knives that took her mother, and been too great a coward ever to tell her that he was saving her life. But that was for later. For now there was only the dais, and the roaring quiet, and Emmerich's brow resting against hers, and the bond thrown wide open between them, so that for the first time in either of their lonely lives, neither one of them was alone inside their own skin. She could feel his joy and his disbelief and his shame at nearly losing her, and she poured back down the same open channel everything she had never once had the words for. "You left your throne to find me?" she said against his mouth. "I would do it again," he said. "In front of 600 more. I would do it in front of the whole world." "You may yet have to," she said. And she kissed him, there on the dais, in front of the court that had scorned her, and felt his wolf and her own turning toward each other in the dark, like two halves of one thing at last made whole. They came back to court in the full green of spring, and the hall of Emberhold gathered again to watch them arrive. It gathered for a different reason this time. Lucan was gone, sent under guard to the cold northern holdings where traitors were kept, and Undine sent after him, and the rest of his lesser people scattered to whatever corners would take them. The council that had meant to set a broken king down now stood ready to name his heir, for the queen was carrying, and the whole realm had a great deal to answer for. The carriage stopped at the foot of the steps. The court held its breath, and Emmerich opened the door himself and stepped down onto the stone on his own 2 feet, unaided, strong, the silver long since driven out of him by a bond that had finished what no healer could. A murmur went through the crowd at the sight of the king they had written off, walking easy, his wolf plain in his eyes for any who cared to look. Then he turned and held out his hand. Bryony took it and stepped down beside him, and the murmur stopped entirely. They had all heard by now. None of them had yet seen. The scentless nobody who had been sent north to pay a debt, the plain gray creature they had sneered at across this very hall, stood before them now, with the old blood singing off her, so that not one wolf in the courtyard could pretend not to feel it. She was not plain. She had never been plain. She had only been hidden, and she was hidden no longer. She walked through them on her husband's arm, unhurried, and they parted for her, and every face that had once turned away now could not look at anything else. Near the front stood the noblewoman who, on Bryony's wedding day, had said loudly that a scentless wife was no wife at all, only a thing to keep a treaty warm. Bryony stopped before her. The woman had gone the color of ash. She sank into a curtsy so deep, her knees nearly touched the floor, and could not manage a single word. "You may rise," Bryony said, pleasant and cool, and passed on, and left her there in the dust of it. They took their seats at the high table, the king and his queen, his hand folding warm over hers, and the bond between them glowed steady and quiet as a banked fire, so that even apart in a crowded hall, neither one of them was ever alone in their own skin again. She had come to this hall the first time, in a servant's grey, uninvited, counting the minutes until she could disappear. She had loosed one breath by accident and brought a king down off his throne to hunt a ghost he would never find, because the ghost had stood above him the whole time, made into no one, by people who called it love. She was no one no longer. She had been the last thing the world wanted, and the first thing he chose, and he had been a ruined king and she had chosen him back. And that, in the end, had been enough to undo every binding laid against them both. Emmerich's thumb moved slow across her knuckles. Down the length of the hall, the court that had scorned her could not look away. Bryony leaned into the warmth of him and did not spare them a thought. "I hope this one stayed with you. Do you think Emmerich was right to try to give Bryony up to keep her safe? Or was he only running from his own worth and calling it mercy? Tell me what you think in the comments. I would love to know. I will see you soon for another story."